Every retirement calculator you've ever used tells you your spending drops after age 75. The standard model, the one built into most financial planning software, assumes a roughly 30% decline in spending as you move through your 80s. That model has a name. It's called the spending smile, and it sounds reasonable until you look at what it's actually based on. That model was built using average retiree data from the 1990s, before assisted living became a $60 billion industry. It assumes your world gets quieter and less expensive in your 80s, but it completely ignores the one thing that can make your final decade more expensive than any other period in your retirement: a health crisis that requires long-term care. We're not talking about a few extra doctor visits. The national median cost for a private nursing home room is now over $116,000 a year. That's more than $9,700 a month. If you follow a spending smile model and don't plan for that possibility, you could be underplanning by $300,000 or more in uninsured late-life care costs. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a retirement that holds together and one that doesn't. If you're within 10 years of retirement, and you've been relying on a standard calculator, this is the video that changes how you think about the math. What I want to show you is why the spending smile is a trap, and what a realistic plan looks like when you account for the one variable it misses. Let's start there. So where did the spending smile come from? It came from real data. Researchers looked at retiree spending across different age groups and noticed a pattern. Spending is high in the early retirement years: travel, dining out, staying active. Then it dips in the mid-70s as people slow down. Then it drops further in the late 80s. The problem is what that data was measuring. It was averaging across all retirees, including the ones who died in their early 70s, the ones who stayed healthy until 90, and everything in between. The model never separated out the group that experienced a major health event. And that group tells a completely different story. About 70% of people turning 65 today will need some form of long-term care in their lifetime. That's not a worst-case estimate. That's from the Administration for Community Living, the federal agency that tracks this data. And for that group, spending in the 80s doesn't go down. It spikes by $8,000 to $14,000 a month. Here's what that looks like in real numbers. Imagine a couple with $1 million saved, retiring at 62. They build a plan using the spending smile model. $50,000 a year in their 60s, dropping to $35,000 in their 70s, and $25,000 in their 80s. The math works on paper. At age 78, one spouse needs assisted living. The cost is $8,500 a month, or about $102,000 a year. Their withdrawal rate just jumped from 3.5% to over 10%. A portfolio that was designed to last 30 years is now depleted by age 82. That's the spending smile trap. And here's what makes this particularly difficult to plan around. The people most likely to end up in that situation are not the ones who made poor decisions. They are often the most careful savers in the room. They did everything right. They just used a model that didn't include the full cost of getting older. The national median annual cost for a private nursing home room in 2025 was $116,796, not $60,000, not $80,000, $116,796, about $9,733 a month. If you plan for spending to decline after 75, and instead one of you needs a 5-year stay in a care facility starting at 78, you're looking at nearly $584,000 in unplanned costs. That single event wipes out the spending drop assumption entirely. This isn't a scare tactic. I've sat with families in their late 70s watching retirement savings disappear because they had no way to absorb that cost. People who worked 40 years, people who did the right thing. The problem wasn't discipline. The problem was a plan that assumed a world that didn't come true. What the spending smile gets right is the pattern in healthy retirements. What it gets wrong is that it treats the average as if it applies to everyone. And for roughly 7 out of 10 people turning 65, the average leaves out a very large and very expensive chapter. So if the spending smile is a broken model, what does a realistic retirement income plan actually look like? You need a structure that handles both the active years and the years when costs can climb far beyond anything you budgeted for. That's what comes next. The answer is not a better calculator. The answer is a different structure for how you organize your money. Most retirement plans treat all your savings as one pool. You estimate a withdrawal rate, you build a budget, and you hope the math holds. The spending smile is baked into that entire approach. What I want to show you instead is a two-bucket system, not because it's complicated, but because it separates two problems that have no business being solved with the same money. Bucket 1 is your go-go bucket. This is the money you live on from roughly 62 to 75. Taxable accounts, Roth accounts, and any income sources that support your active years. This is the bucket you spend freely from. You travel. You visit grandchildren. You do the things retirement is supposed to include. You delay Social Security to build up a larger monthly income. And during this window, before your required minimum distributions kick in at 73, you use the lower tax years to do Roth conversions, moving money from your traditional IRA into a Roth so it grows tax-free and doesn't inflate your income later. Bucket 2 is your long-term care buffer. This is a dedicated portion of your assets, separate, clearly labeled, and not touched during your go-go years, set aside specifically for the possibility of a health event after 75. It might be a fixed indexed annuity. It might be a tips ladder. It might be a conservative brokerage account. The exact vehicle matters less than the discipline of keeping it separate. Here's how this plays out in real numbers. A couple retires at 62 with $1,200,000. They set aside $300,000 in bucket 2, a conservative pool earmarked for potential long-term care. They live on the remaining $900,000 under their go-go plan for 13 years. Two outcomes are possible. If neither of them ever needs significant care, that $300,000 becomes an inheritance, or it becomes a travel fund in their 80s, or it simply stays invested and grows. If one of them needs assisted living at 79, at $8,500 a month, that $300,000 covers roughly 3 years of care, without touching the go-go portfolio, without spiking their taxable income, and without triggering the Medicare premium surcharges that come with a sudden income jump. The go-go portfolio stays intact. The plan doesn't collapse. I've worked with dozens of families in their late 70s watching retirement savings evaporate because they had no buffer like this. I've had to sit across from someone and say, "You may have to sell the vacation home to cover your mother's nursing home." That's a conversation I don't want you to ever have. And for many people, it's entirely preventable, not with a bigger number in your account, but with a clearer structure for what each portion of your money is supposed to do. Now, you might be thinking, what if I don't end up needing long-term care? What if I stay healthy? Then the LTC bucket becomes a bonus, not a loss. The whole point is that you are not hoping for a good outcome and calling it a plan. You are designing a plan that works whether the good outcome happens or the difficult one does. The two-bucket system does not require more money. It requires a different way of looking at the money you already have. But even the best structure falls apart if you ignore one specific tax problem that compounds as you get older. When RMDs and Social Security collide with a sudden care expense and the IRS gets involved, the numbers change fast. That's what most calculators skip entirely, and that's what comes next. In the 1990s, assisted living barely existed as a formal industry. Nursing homes existed, but the structured, multi-year assisted living model that we have today, with monthly fees, care tiers, and memory care wings, was still being built. The financial planning assumptions of that era reflected a world where most people either stayed home, moved in with family, or died relatively quickly after a serious health event. That world is gone. Today, assisted living is a $60 billion industry, with its own pricing, its own cost inflation, and its own set of contracts most families have never read before they need to sign one. Here are the actuarial numbers that matter. A 65-year-old woman today has about a 50% chance of living to 85, according to SSA life expectancy tables. For a man, it's around 40%. Those numbers alone would change how you think about retirement. But there's a second layer. Among people who live to 85, roughly 40% will need nursing home care at some point, according to the National Institute on Aging. Put those two numbers together and think about what they mean for a married couple. If you're a healthy 62-year-old with a spouse, the probability that at least one of you lives to 85 is well above 70%. And among those who reach 85, nearly half will need a level of care that can cost $100,000 a year or more. You cannot design a retirement plan that treats a coin flip level event as a footnote. The standard reaction I hear is, "I'll just use Medicare." And that instinct makes sense. You've been paying into the system for 40 years. But Medicare does not cover long-term custodial care. It covers short-term skilled nursing after a hospital stay, and only up to 100 days under specific conditions. After that, you're paying out of pocket until you spend down enough to qualify for Medicaid, which has its own eligibility rules and asset limits. So Medicare won't solve this. The savings you've built up are on the line. And there's one more complication. A government program that is supposed to help you in retirement can actually penalize you for being financially prepared. If a sudden care expense forces you to pull large amounts from your IRA in a single year, you don't just pay income tax. You trigger Medicare premium surcharges based on income from 2 years prior. That's the trap inside the trap, and it's what the next section is about. Let me walk you through how this actually plays out when someone doesn't have the two-bucket structure in place. John and Mary retired at 63 with $1,500,000, a solid number. Their split was roughly 50% in a traditional IRA, 30% in taxable accounts, and 20% in a Roth IRA. They followed standard advice. Spend the taxable accounts first, let the IRA compound, delay Social Security until 70 to maximize the monthly benefit. Textbook planning. At 78, John has a stroke. He moves into full-time assisted living at $8,500 a month, $102,000 a year. Their taxable account is mostly depleted by now. They have to pull the care costs from the IRA, which has grown to about $1,200,000. Here's where it gets expensive in a way most people don't see coming. John's required minimum distribution at 79 is roughly $55,000 based on the standard IRS life expectancy factor. Add the $102,000 in care withdrawals on top of that. Their total IRA withdrawal for the year is now $157,000. That pushes their combined income into the 22% federal bracket. But more importantly, it pushes their modified adjusted gross income above the IRMAA threshold, which for a single filer in 2026 is $109,000. When your income crosses that line, Medicare doesn't just charge you the standard Part B premium of $202.90 a month. It charges you a surcharge. The amount depends on how far over the threshold you land, but a single dollar over the first tier costs you up to $1,500 in extra Medicare premiums the following year. And 85% of Mary's Social Security benefit becomes taxable income at the same time. Their effective marginal rate on those forced withdrawals, between federal income tax, the Social Security tax inclusion, and the IRMAA surcharge, comes out around 35%. Now run the same scenario with the two-bucket system. John and Mary set aside $400,000 at retirement in a separate taxable bucket, low growth, conservative, specifically for this kind of event. When John needs care at 78, they draw the $102,000 from that bucket. The money was already taxed. There is no income spike. Their IRA stays on its normal RMD schedule. Their MAJ stays below the IRMAA threshold. Mary's Social Security stays mostly tax-free. The IRA and Roth remain untouched. Same health event, same family. Two very different outcomes, based entirely on how the money was organized before the crisis hit. Now, you're probably thinking about the behavioral side of this. Setting aside $300,000 or $400,000 and not touching it for 15 years is not easy, especially in your early retirement years when you want to live fully. That's where most people stall. And it's exactly the psychological barrier that comes next. Knowing the data does not automatically make it easy to act on. That's not a willpower problem. It's how the brain works. There's a cognitive bias called optimism bias. Your brain is wired to believe that negative outcomes happen to other people, not to you. When your neighbor ends up needing long-term care, your mind finds a reason it makes sense for them. They didn't exercise. They didn't manage their stress. They had a difficult family history. You build a story that explains why it happened to them and why it won't happen to you. The data says otherwise. The data says it's roughly a coin flip. I've had the same feeling. For a long time, I skipped over the long-term care section in my own retirement thinking, because it felt too heavy to sit with. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're human. But I watched a client spend $140,000 in 14 months on home health aides for her mother, and every dollar came out of her own retirement savings. She hadn't planned for it. She didn't think her mother would need that level of care. She wasn't careless. She just hadn't made the decision while she still had the time and the money to absorb it. I changed my thinking after that conversation. You have to plan for this while you're healthy and while you have options, not after the need becomes urgent. One small reframe that helps: instead of telling yourself, "I need to save more for long-term care," try, "I'm relabeling 10% of my portfolio as health event insurance." That shift changes the feeling from guilt to ownership. It's the same money. It's a different story about what that money is for. Now let's talk about the practical steps to actually set this up. Here are 3 things you can actually do, starting now. The first is to use the low-income window before Social Security and RMDs. If you retire between 62 and 70, you have a gap, often 8 to 10 years, when your income is lower than it will ever be again in retirement. That is the Roth conversion window. Converting $30,000 a year from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA during that period costs you tax at the 12% federal rate. The top of the 12% bracket in 2026 is $48,475 for a single filer and $96,950 if you're married filing jointly. Every dollar you convert below those lines is a dollar that won't show up as forced taxable income in your 70s as an RMD. It also reduces your MA-JY, which keeps you below the IRMAA threshold in future years. The math on this is real. A 63-year-old with $1,600,000 in a traditional IRA who converts $50,000 a year for 5 years reduces his lifetime RMD obligation by roughly $275,000. That's not speculation. That's the compound effect of removing that money from the IRA before the IRS forces it out at a higher rate later. The second step is to actually label and separate your long-term care buffer. If you have an HSA and you're still working, it is one of the most efficient accounts you can build for this purpose. Contributions are pre-tax, growth is tax-free, and withdrawals for qualified medical expenses are tax-free. After 65, you can also use HSA funds for non-medical expenses. You just pay ordinary income tax on those, the same as a traditional IRA. There's no penalty. For people who have maxed out HSA contributions over working years, that balance can become a meaningful care reserve. For those without an HSA, a conservative taxable account, kept separate and clearly designated, serves the same purpose. The key is the label. Money that has a job assigned to it is easier to leave alone. The third step is to check your Medicare Part B premium picture right now. The 2026 standard premium is $202.90 a month. But once your MA crosses $109,000 as a single filler or $218,000 filing jointly, you move into IRMAA territory. The surcharges start at $84.30 extra per month and climb steeply from there. Because IRMAA is based on income from 2 years prior, a single high-income year in your early retirement, from a large IRA withdrawal or an asset sale, can raise your Medicare premium for the next year before you even realize it happened. Knowing those thresholds now, before you start taking distributions, lets you plan around them instead of reacting to them afterward. You have the structure. You have the tax mechanics. Let's close with why this is all about freedom, not fear. The spending smile is a flawed model, but now you know the real shape of retirement spending. You've seen how a two-bucket system, Roth conversions in your 60s, and a dedicated long-term care buffer can protect you from the one event most retirement plans don't account for. If you're 55 to 65 and you want to retire knowing the math actually works, not hoping it does, hit subscribe. I publish a new retirement breakdown every week that shows you the hidden mechanics behind the standard advice. Your retirement is not about dying with the biggest number in your account. It's about living with choices until the very end. That's what this channel is for. I'll see you in the next one.